Dogman caused my breakup. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a Dogman story for you from the summer before the pandemic, or first pandemic, or however you want to say it. My then partner Carrie and I were driving southeast down from East Grand Rapids to Bloomfield Hills in Michigan, where our friends from college were getting married. Carrie and I had been discussing, or nearly almost discussing tying the knot ourselves. Admittedly, I was more into the idea than Carrie was, but the fact that they were willing to come as my date to this wedding in front of a lot of the people we both knew seemed like a sign to me that maybe we'd be the next married couple among our friends. But that's when the Dogman stepped between us and said, no. At any rate, I was driving, following what Google said was the best route to the wedding. We were on Route 69, which actually curves northward first to Flint, then curves back down south to Bloomfield Hills for the rest of the drive. Well, we never made it to Flint, so we never made it to the wedding. And as you already know, this was because of the Dogman. There was very little traffic that morning, and I was on my third large coffee, which put me in a talkative mood. I was jabbering on to Carrie about this and that, and my head was turned to the right so that I wasn't seeing what was happening on the other side of the highway, past the green margin in between the two different roads. Suddenly Carrie's eyes grew wide looking past me, so I turned around and saw this really huge monster running across that highway, entering onto the grassy margin and heading in our direction. It was ahead of us, but at the speed I was driving, I didn't think I would have enough time to stop the car before smashing into it. Unlike most Dogman reports I hear on the internet, this creature was running on all fours. I screamed and slammed on the brakes, not knowing if I should swerve left or right, since I couldn't predict what this massive animal was gonna do. Well, here's what it did. It ran in front of us, and then it stood up. This giant black dog stood up like a man and turned to face me as though daring me to hit it. The thing went from 4 or 5 feet tall at the shoulder to well over 8 feet tall when standing up. When on its hind legs, it looked remarkably like a giant human, just as it had resembled a dog when down on all fours. The creature had dog ears up on top of its dog head, and it had dog legs on which it stood. Yet, somehow, it mostly resembled a big muscular man, more than it resembled anything else I'd ever seen. I swerved left. I swerved right. I was having trouble making up my mind what I should do. By the time I went all in on swerving right, the big canine man took a step in my direction, either intending to grab the car, or else just trying to taunt me. In either case, I swerved even more to the right, and I found myself and my partner careening off the road and straight into a tree. Carrie was out of it, and I was barely conscious and stuck where I was in the car. I remember looking over and seeing that Dogman walking toward us, as though he were curious about examining his handiwork. I felt a desperate desire to escape, followed by confusion and sleepiness. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room later that night. Carrie was sitting by the bed and comforted me greatly on that first night. Although Carrie had been knocked out by the collision, I was the only one with any serious injuries, and it took over a month before I was finally able to go home. I have to say that Carrie was great to me throughout that experience, and that helped me have the strength to get my life back in order. Once I was home, I was finally well enough to go back through all the emails and texts and DMs I hadn't had time to read or respond to for the previous month. A lot of people were asking me what happened, so I answered with the truth. I told them the same thing I told you. Well, this did not sit well with Carrie, and I felt the mood in our relationship go cold overnight. Turns out my admission that it was the Dogman who had caused the wreck was forcing Carrie into uncomfortable situations at work and on social media. Was it really a Dogman, they all asked? Are the two of you wearing tinfoil hats? That sort of thing went on. Carrie shut down his Twitter and blamed me for all the troubles that I had unintentionally caused. You and your monster stories, Carrie shouted at me. You and your fairy tales. You always believed in monsters. I should have known you weren't mature enough for an adult relationship. Of course, this was unfair on multiple levels. I doubt I even need to explain why to you. If you've seen a cryptid, you may yourself have endured this kind of harsh criticism from family and loved ones. When I would remind Carrie that I only saw the monster second, not first, that I wasn't the only one who saw it, the criticism would turn into open attacks on me. It was like Carrie grew more prejudiced and mean the more I would point out that this happened to both of us. When I realized that fitting in with idiots on Twitter mattered more to Carrie than supporting me or living a life based on truth and reality. I also understood that there was nothing left of our relationship. I guess Carrie wasn't really angry at me for the accident. Carrie was angry at me that I wouldn't lie about the accident. Carrie was angry at me for not conforming and not fitting in. I've never been a conformist, and when our relationship started, neither was Carrie. In fact, things were quite the opposite to that back in the beginning. But times change, and some people grow up into straight-laced individuals living their life based on fear. I had a dream in which I was driving down that same Route 69, and there came the Dogman all over again. This time, I was alone in the car, just as I am now alone in my waking life. I saw the monster in plenty of time to avoid hitting him safely, and when the Dogman saw this, he had a kind of evil smirk on his face. I felt like I knew what he was thinking. You're much better off alone. At least now you watch the road when you drive. I suspect there's some truth in that, but it didn't stop me from waking up crying. Even if I am better off, life feels so empty now. I find it hard to get out of bed and face the day alone. Life since the pandemic began has also been so incredibly sad every single day. I don't care if he actually did me a favor. I still can't stand that smug, taunting Dogman. I still haven't even accepted what's happened to me, and I know I need to do that before I can forgive, and I need to forgive before I can move on. Instead, I'm living my life ping-ponging back and forth between hating the world and hating myself. But mostly, I'm furious at the Dogman. Because Dogman caused my breakup. He was here, then he was gone. He left us alone to carry on. But then he drove back like a trucker to join us again. And he's James Tucker. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer, James Tucker, for making this episode possible. In exchange for his contributions, we share with him the links to our weekly Sunday secret uncensored Dogman stories, far too wild to run on this channel. You can see them too. Just join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or else click that join link under this or any of our videos and become a channel member. Henry Lee Dogman will be along at the end of the show to fill in any details I may have left out. But first, let's join our old friend PQ Ribber as he relates the very scary story that we call
Dogman in New Jersey? As told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. This story took place in Wharton State Forest in New Jersey back in summer 2001, a few months before 9/11 happened. I lost my sister and two friends in the World Trade Center, so I tend to measure things in terms of pre-9/11 and post-9/11. One of my friends who died in the WTC later was with me that day. Let's call him Phil. and he brought along his fiancée that he never lived long enough to marry. I hate telling this story, not because I'm afraid people will think I'm crazy for saying I saw a monster, but because it reminds me of how much I still miss Phil. We used to camp in the forest since we were teenagers, and by this time we were old men in our later 20s, so we were pretty set in our ways. We each brought our own tent and half the supplies, and would stay in the most remote places we could manage to hike to. Phil's fiancée, we'll call her Cinnamon, also loved staying out all night in the forest, but she owned a Winnebago Chieftain with a microwave, a TV, state-of-the-art VHS player, fancy shower she had specially built for her, all the modern conveniences her ample Wall Street salary could buy. I was dead set against sleeping in a camper, so we compromised and convinced Cinnamon we'd camp in our tents right outside the Winnebago. This way we could run inside if anything too scary happened. I figured I was humoring the lady. I didn't actually expect anything bad to happen, since nothing bad had ever happened to me or Phil on any of our previous excursions. The two of us built a fire to roast s'mores after Cinnamon's sumptuous microwave TV dinner feast, and we were surprised when Ms. Diva herself actually came out into the forest proper to sit under the moon with us and enjoy the evening air. I'd brought some craft beer that an old buddy of mine and Phil's had brewed, and soon even Cinnamon had loosened up. We were telling old stories and enjoying each other's company. After a while, I felt familiar enough with Cinny, and drunk enough in general, that I just asked her outright, "Why, if you love nature, do you stay inside a Winnebago all the time instead of in nature?" "Oh, she's got good reasons, dude. Believe me," Phil squirted out nervously. "In fact," he continued, "it's a story that's kind of a little too creepy to tell here in the middle of nowhere. Let her tell you the story next week over lunch in the city." Both Cinnamon and I began teasing Phil that he was a scaredy cat and a chicken, until he relented and gave Cinnamon permission to finally explain to me why she only camps out behind metal and glass in her trailer. "Well, it was years ago in a forest very much like this one," she began, and I settled back, ready to hear the tale. "I was camping much like you two do with my Uncle Freddy. We had 2 small tents and precious little else with us. This was our 4th time out in the forest alone. And even though I was only 12 years old, I felt very comfortable in the wilderness as long as Uncle Freddy was there. We always found the closest ranger and introduced ourselves before setting up camp, and Freddy made me memorize and describe to him how I could reach the ranger in an emergency if anything should happen to him. We were both very proud of our foresight and our ability to plan things out logically. What could possibly go wrong for 2 brilliant, careful people like us? So on that night, we found out exactly what could go wrong. "Get to the story already," I whined. "My beer's getting warm." "Shh, don't spoil the spooky mood," Phil admonished me. "Okay, all right," I relented, "but please finish before I have to pee. Deal?" Cinnamon jokingly agreed and returned to her story. "So, Uncle Freddy was telling me a ghost story from when he was a kid. He said that when the ghost was there, you could tell before it did even anything. He said you could hear the air change, whatever that meant. And he said the ghost would throw rocks at them from the ceiling. It had good aim, and the neighbors thought his parents beat him because he always had bruises on his face from the ghost's rocks. And just as he said that, I swear to God, a rock flew into our camp from somewhere. I was terrified because I thought it was the ghost from Uncle Freddy's story. But Uncle Freddy didn't think that. He got up really angry, stood up and shouted, "Think you're funny? Think you're funny?" And just then a small rock zipped across the forest and hit him right on the cheek, knocking him backward. I screamed over and over. That's all I remember doing. Uncle Freddy stood up again and started cursing, using nasty words I'd never heard before. He said, "You ain't nothing but a punk-ass teenager. If you think you're so big and bad, why don't you come out here and fight like a real man?" And so right then, his adversary did step out of the forest. Wasn't a ghost like I thought, and it wasn't like a punk teenager like Uncle Freddy thought. It was the tallest, hairiest man I had ever seen. My first instinct was to run, but Uncle Freddy told me never to run from something that can eat you. It only makes them hungrier, so I stood my ground and looked to Freddy to see what we should do. He stood there just looking, with his mouth hanging open. Then he grabbed my hand and we ran, running through the thorn bushes and banging our heads on tree branches in the dark. I'm sure the monster could have caught us easily, but fortunately for us, he was just happy we were leaving his turf. We made it to the ranger station in no time and told him the story. He gave us a place to sleep and told us he'd head back to our camp in the morning to guard us as we pack up our tents and equipment. Well, I tell you, the next morning our camp was shredded. The tents were ripped, our food was either gone or strewn around, even our compasses and camera had been stomped into oblivion. Now, I still love nature, but what I do not like is accidentally being on the turf of an 8-foot-tall apex predator. I packed my Winnebago to face the way I came in, so that when someone or something asks me to leave, they never have to ask twice. I was about to ask her if she'd ever had anything like that ever happen again when the quiet of the forest was interrupted by the loudest barking I'd ever heard. I call it barking because I don't know what else to call it. It sounded almost like language. If a dog or wolf could speak, I'd imagine it sounding like this sound. Whatever was being said, it was without a doubt an angry message. "What was that?" Phil asked, jumping to his feet. "Damn it, I told you this was not the place for that kind of story." Cinnamon insisted we all pile in the Winnebago, and I was in no mood to argue. I stomped out the fire as quickly as I could while the other two went inside. In the last light of the dying fire, I saw what was making the barking language. It was a dog, or it had a long snout like a dog, but the problem is that dogs don't stand up like people, and this thing was standing up. Suddenly it turned and looked at me and then screamed. I ran toward the trailer, and the thing ran up right behind me. As I grabbed the door, it scratched my back. Screaming in pain, I flung myself inside, and the thing tried to come in after me. Phil fought and kicked at the braying beast until he was able to get the door shut on it. It tried to get in for a while, screaming ridiculously and insanely. Cinnamon was sitting in the corner crying, and I think we all felt like we were going to die. Got quiet outside after a while, and we wondered if the thing had left. Cautiously, I got up off the floor and peeked out the side window. The thing was right there waiting for me. It bellowed again, and then I swear it chest bumped the trailer. It did it again and again. It flung itself at the trailer, banging us with its chest. The thing was so strong, I thought it might actually push us off the road or even knock us over. So I yelled at Cindy to get me the expletive-deleted keys, and I drove the HE double hockey sticks out of there. I heard it bark and scream at us one more time before we put some distance between us. Recently I was surfing YouTube and I came upon videos about Dogman. I had no idea that was even a thing. Could that have been the thing that we saw? It had a long snout, 2 pointy ears that stood up, brownish fur, and the most terrifying claws I ever saw in any living creature. I've searched online and found nothing about Dogman appearing in New Jersey, so maybe that isn't what tried to kill us. The only thing I can tell you, for sure, is that a few months before 9/11, we saw something that shouldn't exist and couldn't possibly be there. And I've never gone out camping again in all these years since.
Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. We're working on figuring out how to add the $10 level to the PayPal Club too. Hopefully that will happen sometime before August of 2021. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal Subscribers Club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal Club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.